Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Extranet User Manager's new User-Centric Login Experience webinar. My name is Peter Carson, and I'm going to be presenting today. I'm the president of Extranet User Manager, also a SharePoint MVP and a partner seller with Microsoft Canada. Contact details are here, and as always, we're recording the session, and we'll be posting the slide deck up as well. So you'll have all the links, contact information, everything you need for that. Just go to our http://eum.co website, go into the events section, and you'll see this event with the slide deck and recording. Should be tomorrow sometime. We'll get that up after the presentation. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Extranet User Manager, I thought I'd start with a quick history. We'll keep this fairly brief for those of you that are familiar with us. It goes back about 10 years now. Really, more recently, around 2015, we launched out Extranet User Manager's own brand and website. We've been adding features to it, and very proud of the latest 2019 feature is this user-centric EUM login that we're going to be focusing on today. We have customers around the world, here in Canada where we're located, in the US, Europe, other parts of the world as well. So in terms of an agenda that we're going to go through today is we've already done the introductions. We'll dive into the user-centric login experience that we're going to be showing you here, but we'll also provide a broader overview of the Extranet User Manager product itself and its features. Touch on its licensing. We're actually going to spend a fair bit of time on demo side of things. We're going to use a couple of client examples. Actually, I didn't update the agenda. We're going to use both March of Dimes and the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Society as part of our talk today. We may not run the whole hour, but I assume if I give you a little time back in your day, that's not a bad thing for people, and we'll go from there. Now, before I dive into the presentation, I always like to get a sense from the audience what sort of technologies they're familiar with and they're using today. So let me open up a poll here. And I'll go ahead and launch that out. If you can answer back, you can answer multiple on here if you're using one, two, or all of these different technologies. Office 365, Microsoft Flow, we're going to be touching on from a workflows point of view. Power BI we won't be showing, but we will be talking about some of the plans coming up on that, and SharePoint on premises, which is part of the solutions we're talking about here today as well. So I'll give you a bit to answer back on that, and then we'll close the poll back. All right, give you about 5 more seconds. And we'll shut that down. Let me just share that back out with the group so you can get an understanding of what that breaks down in. 89% in Office 365. So that number just keeps going up and up and up. I mean, the adoption of Office 365 is awesome. SharePoint Online is part of that as well. A Flow, about a third of you working with that. So we're going to show you some cool things that we're doing on that front. Almost a half on Power BI. So that's something that we're going to talk on and discuss what our future plans are around Power BI. And SharePoint on-premise is still about 2/3 from that point of view. So that's a great background. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so let's dive right into the raison d'etre of what we're talking about here, which is why have we created a new register login? And it may seem odd that a lot of work has gone into this and it actually feels really simple, and that's the goal here. Often less is actually more difficult, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about what's the flow, what's the process, either as a new user coming into your extranet or an existing user logging back in who maybe hasn't visited your site in quite some time and may in fact not even remember whether they have an account or not. So how do we avoid confusion around that? And really that's a key piece of it here is not having the user make that decision. Don't make them decide whether they need to sign in or register and maybe partway through the process say, well, sorry, you can't proceed because you either don't have an account or you're trying to register and you already do. Just guide them through that process. Remove this question from the user. And that's a key part of what we're going to be showing and talking about today. Our product is all about user onboarding. So that user experience needs to be smooth and flawless. And our goal is to make that equally smooth and flawless for all of our customers that are using our product as well. This is the first thing that your customers, your partners, whoever's coming into your extranet is going to experience. Let's make that as positive an experience as possible and really focus on the UX side of that. The reality is that, I imagine much like myself, you have many, many different accounts for lots of different services, both personally and from a business point of view. It just gets confusing. What are my credentials? How do I sign into all these different sites? I'm actually going to show a bit of 1Password, which I personally love from a password management point of view. I mean, that is part of what I would recommend most people to do is to use some sort of key vault or password manager to help manage that. But recognizing that not everybody does that, how do we still remove remove that confusion for the external user. Maybe remove the password altogether. Allow users to use Microsoft, Google, Facebook accounts to set up their access into your extranet rather than creating yet another password, which could future be compromised if you share them between different services and things like that. Bad idea from a security point of view. Reality is a lot of people do that. And really what happens through this process is Extranet User Manager performs that validation to say, hey, have you already registered on the site? I'm going to take you down the login path. If you haven't, well, let's profile you and let's go through that process of registering. But make that registration process a single seamless experience. Don't make me restart that process a couple times, go back to my email to validate, things like that, and maybe lose where I was trying to go to in the first place. When you start that registration process, it's very much like you're doing the login itself. You're going to actually complete the registration and the login in one single process seamlessly all the way through that. And ultimately, you're going to end up right where you're trying to go at the end of the day, even though you didn't have an account when you started that process. I'm going to actually demonstrate that in a couple different scenarios. From a more technical note, how do we make it simpler for you to deploy this? Well, in the past, we had registration kind of outed in its own application. We've actually integrated that right into the login. We needed to do that to make it a single login experience, but it also makes it simpler for your developers who are implementing our product to say, well, everything lives under that one application. Once you brand that from a login point of view, you've also branded it from a registration perspective. So without further ado, let's actually dive over and talk about and go through that registration process. So I'm going to use our live public website. We've deployed our latest release on there, and we've customized it with the things that we want to do from a registration point of view. Now I've got it in my main browser here. What I'm going to do is actually open up an incognito window and say, okay, let's just absolutely start fresh. And feel free to try this out as we're going through together here as well. It's very simple. Go to eom.co in your browser, hit enter. That launches our public website. We've got a cookie policy. I'm incognito now, so I need to accept that because I don't have the cookie laid down for that. Sorry, Logan, I'm not going to chat right now. So I'm going to close the chat window in there and say, okay, this is great. This is an anonymous site. I can browse around, get all sorts of content about your product. But let's say I want to go deeper from that point of view. One of the things that we're driving people to on our site is this try it out here. We recognize that installing our product in a trial is a fairly onerous task, and making that sort of the first step of a new customer is maybe too much. So what we want to do is make it easy for them to actually experience the product from an end user's point of view through this try it out page. So it's explaining here, what am I going to need to do? I have to register. I may have to validate my email. We'll talk about the scenarios in there, and then I have full access into the site. And then down here, we can see all the things that I can access as part of that. I mean, we publish all of our product documentation up on our website, but we ask you to first register and create an account and sign in before we give you access to things like branding guidelines and developer guides, our deeper documentation on the product. Likewise, things like ebooks and white papers, you can provide your email address and just download them, or you can sign into the site and have direct access into those. All of our product releases, being able to download the zip files for that, again, require you to have an account. And even our knowledge base. We've recently launched out a full support desk powered by Zendesk. And we've actually integrated single sign-in into that as well. So you use the same account that you create on our site here to access Zendesk as part of that as well. And we're going to talk about that single sign-on scenario in one of the customer scenarios a little later as well. So let's come back up to the top and say, okay, well, let's actually start the process. Click on the start here. You'll notice up in the top here, the URL changed. It went from www to login.extranetusermanager.com. So our product installs as a separate application. Right now, it's protecting our www site, but as I mentioned, it's also protecting our Zendesk site, which is on another URL. You can have as many different applications under that one installation of Extranet User Manager provided through there. So I've got a couple choices here. It says, well, get started, choose a method to log in or register. So the system doesn't actually care which I'm trying to do. It doesn't require me to make that decision, and I can decide how I want to come in. Do I want to provide an email address and a password, or do I want to use a social identity? Maybe I use Gmail and I want to use Google to come in. I'm a Facebook user. I have a Microsoft account. We even put up our own Azure AD. So for our staff coming in, they can actually use their staff credentials to access the site. And even some of the back-end functionality that we'll show you later is accessible to them through there. I actually like the social integration for this type of site. I don't want to maintain yet another password in another system. So let's actually go through that scenario. I'm going to choose Google and go from there. Now remember, I launched an incognito window, so I'm not signed into Chrome, I'm not signed into Google, it doesn't know who I am. I'm actually using the 1Password software, and it's actually providing my credentials to sign into Google, autofilling my password for me, and going from there. So I've signed into Google, and it's now come back to the Extranet login and said, hey, I know who you are. You're pcarson337. That's my test Gmail account. And your name is Peter Carson. So that was actually provided from Google. And we can trust that email address because it actually came from Google. We know that's actually your Gmail account. Later, we'll talk about email validation. I'll take you through that scenario. We're actually not going to need to do it here because we can already trust that that's that user's email address. I'm just going to put a little indicator on here. I have a lot of accounts, so let me keep those straight. I have to fill in my country and organization. I can opt to receive the newsletter if I want. I'm actually going to skip past that. I do need to accept the terms and conditions and then go ahead and register. So it's now creating an account for me because I'm a first-time user coming through here and taking me in. The first thing we do is we have a disclaimer on our site. This is an option. You can have this. This is actually not a typical disclaimer. It's not so much illegal. It's actually explaining, because remember, the whole scenario here is to get people to try it out, what purpose the disclaimer provides and what capabilities you have as part of that. I need to accept it in order to enter the site and continue from there. And remember, because I used Google and I could trust that that actually is the person's email address that they own as part of this, since they came through the federation, we don't even need to do any validation around that email. I'll show you later when we go through the email password combination where we do actually send an email and confirm that the person who's registering owns that email address. So the site now knows who I am. It's got my Peter Carson Gmail name in there, and it's now lit up all of these things. So if I go into the product documentation, for example, it's no longer going to prompt me for credentials because I've already signed in. In fact, even if I go down to Zendesk, it'll auto-log me into Zendesk as part of that through the single sign-on. So that's all very seamless for the end user that's coming in there. Now let's back out of that. Let's just close the incognito window and start that whole process over again. Let's actually go through that same scenario. But remember, I've already created an account, so I exist on the site already. So I go ahead and click the sign in register. Choose my Google. I started a new incognito, so I've got to start my Google sign in over again. Normally you would be auto signed into this and you wouldn't see these coming through here. But it comes back to the site and boom, I'm done. I didn't have to complete a registration because it knew that I was already a user on the site. I didn't have to go through the disclaimer because I've already accepted that. I'm in, I'm good. I can come into the try it out. I can go into the support desk. I can do all those things as a signed in user. So it feels very simple, but there's actually a lot of moving pieces happening under the hood. We've embodied that complexity into our product so that your users and even your site owners don't need to understand or be aware of that complexity. So we're going to do some more demo, but let me switch back to slides for a minute. So I want to start with a bit of background for folks that aren't that familiar with Extranet User Manager. Why would you use the product? What does that look like? And these are things that we ask all of our clients as we're starting our engagements. Some things to consider as you're building an extranet, questions you need to ask yourself, and that we're going to ask as well as we're engaging with you on one of these projects. And first and foremost, who's coming into the extranet? In our scenario I just gave you, it's potential customers and active customers. Potentials to try it out, active customers to log a support incident, to get some product documentation, to download the latest release. That's who's coming into our extranet. Does everyone see the same information? For the most part, yes. I mean, if you go into Zendesk, you're going to see your own support cases. You're not going to see other people's support cases, but the rest of the content is fairly much common across everyone that's coming in through there. Is there a member database to interface with? Interesting. I'm actually going to talk a bit about this. We're using Dynamics 365 under the hood as our tracking and customer relationship management, not just for our website, but for our business in general. And we actually have hooks in there that create contact and lead records in that CRM database based on somebody registering. We're using Click Dimensions, which is a commercial product, to do that, but we've actually built those as custom integrations into things like Salesforce and CRM for other clients as well. Is it invitation only, or can people self-register? And in the scenario I took you through, it was self-registration. We often have sites where they know who those external users are. They don't want people to self-discover and self-register. They just want to send invitations out. In fact, we're going to have an upcoming webinar. We're going to talk more about that invitation process. Part of the new release that's come out is things like private registration links that you can share out to people to streamline that invitation process. Now, what are the approval processes around those new registrations? Again, I'm going to talk about Microsoft Flow today and some of the cool things we're doing on that side to go even further from an approval workflow point of view. And is it just your extranet that you're building, or are you providing single sign-on into other systems like our Zendesk scenario? Again, we're going to have other examples that we take you through as part of that. So all things you need to think about as you're thinking about planning your extranet. Now you also think about, well, what's my environment? Am I Office 365? Am I SharePoint on premises? Am I some other system altogether? We're not tied directly into SharePoint. We were when our product first came out a number of years ago, but we've become a much broader identity provider for systems in general. But if you are coming into Office 365, what are the things you need to be aware of? Well, you can use the out-of-the-box external sharing from Microsoft, and it's actually awesome for the appropriate scenarios. If you've got very small use cases where you're sharing, let's say this presentation out with a half a dozen people, I can use the external sharing features in Office 365 to do that, and it's very effective. But if that starts to scale, when we talk about a one-to-many versus a one-to-few type of sharing scenario, it really doesn't scale from that perspective. Scenarios that I'm going to talk about today have thousands or tens of thousands of external users. That sharing of individual links just doesn't work from that point of view. So we need some delegation and some management around that. We need better management around permissions so that it doesn't become a governance nightmare from that point of view. The Azure B2B, which is an alternative to the external sharing, that has maybe more scalability, but it doesn't have the end user delegation built in. You have to do it through the Azure portal. It's not really end user friendly. There is no self-registration. There isn't that integration to line of business systems or even on-premises AD. So our Extranet User Manager product fills a lot of those gaps and really makes it a scalable, well-governed, user-friendly experience from that point of view. Now, there are some caveats there. One of the scenarios I'm going to show you is us taking over the login experience for Office 365. That really only applies for our not-for-profit or charitable organizations because they can get, it's now a smaller number, but they can still get 2,000 E1 licenses from Microsoft for free to use for part of that. So, the current licensing says if you use our login to sign in, you actually need a paid subscription for that customer. So the charitables can use the free ones. Everyone else would have to pay for them. They don't really want to do that. There is a feature coming that's still in private preview from Microsoft around direct federation where we can take over the login experience. We're pretty keen to see that come out. And as soon as that's available in public preview, we're going to have some interesting announcements around what that looks like as well. The other scenario is that you're using on-premises SharePoint, which we're going to be showing a scenario for today here, or maybe you've got other systems altogether that you want to provide extranet or single sign-on access into. So we act as the identity provider. We provide that fully branded registration and login experience, other features as part of that as well. We support everything from SharePoint 2010 up to 2019, as well as custom applications you build yourselves or commercial SaaS applications like Zendesk, Desire to Learn, some of the examples that we have there. So let's give you a quick tour through some of the features. I won't spend too much time on these, but I want to give you a broad sense of what's in the product. There are end user components to it. I've already shown you a number of those, the login experience, the registration process. Haven't shown you the set password yet. We're going to show that to you in a minute. Profiles, the ability to reset forgotten passwords. There is a whole administration component to it where I can manage users, groups, which users belong to which groups, configuration of the system as a whole, and that has role-based security on it as well. So I can make people group owners, and all they can do is manage the people that belong to their groups. I can let them be group editors, and they can create new groups, or they could be what we call configuration editors, where they have full rights to do everything, including configure emails and federation clients and all sorts of technical stuff. So there is a rich admin backend to that. There is a branded experience. We're going to show you the March of Dimes example as sort of our key case study that we're going to be going through as part of this. The idea of delegation, that you can delegate out to your business to say, IT doesn't need to manage these external accounts. The business who knows who those external people can manage that process. And they can even manage approvals around things like self-registration, which can be very customized from a workflow, integration, look and feel, and process point of view. As I mentioned, everything from SharePoint 2010 to 2019, Office 365, other applications, fully adaptive, which means if I'm using it on a smartphone, a tablet, or desktop, I'm going to get an optimized experience through all those different devices. You can host it up in Azure. That's actually our recommended now. Running it as what's called an Azure App Service makes a ton of sense, but you can still install it on your own on-premise server if that's your preference from that point of view. Okay, so let's dive into the featured case study that we want to spend some time on here, which is for March of Dimes Canada. So March of Dimes Canada is a charitable organization. The Canadian group is, their vision is really to be the primary service provider for community-based support to Canadians, not just from a stroke point of view, that's the focus of this particular site, but for anybody with physical disabilities. So a little background, we were engaged by March of Dimes last year to build a site called Afterstroke, which is intended to target stroke survivors, caregivers, and healthcare providers related to stroke. And the idea was to collect demographic information around those people, to build an online community, and to provide online support services that's tailored to those particular audiences. So there's a custom registration process that walks people through that profiling process, and there's multiple steps in there. We did a fair bit of user experience testing. We actually engaged an outside firm. They recruited various different user groups, including stroke survivors and caregivers themselves, to guide us through the process of building that registration process, make sure that it worked really well, people could easily understand it. The initial site launched last August in 2018. Feedback was generally positive, but we did have comments that users were being confused about whether they needed to register or sign in. They may not be active coming to the site on a daily basis. They come back, they can't remember whether they've created an account or not. They may go back through that registration process even though they already have an account, get partway through it, and have them tell them that they already have an account. And that becomes a point of confusion and frustration for people coming into the site. We'd already been talking about this and saying, we need to address that scenario within our product itself. So we started work on that back the late last year, continued through the early part of this year. Actually took us a little longer because of some of the different scenarios we wanted to support, like the private registration and such as part of that. We've actually released last month the latest release of Extranet User Manager that includes what I just showed you on our public website around that. And what we've done is we've actually done a development version of that I'm going to show you on our version of the Afterstroke site. So a couple of URLs here. I mean, there is the live afterstroke.marchofdimes.ca. That site has not been updated yet with the current work. It's very much a work in progress. We actually just started it last week. We were hustling even this morning to finish off a few things to make sure that that experience works well through there. So if I come back to my browser, oh, that's my incognito one. Sorry, too many windows going here. There we go. We have our afterstroke.marchofdimes.ca, which is the live site that launched last August. And it has the registration and sign-in links here that's going to take you down to PASS. And that was the thing that we want to address here, is how do we simplify and make that work better from that point of view. So let's actually come back to my incognito. I'm just going to start a fresh one and start that process from there. And I'm going to go to our development version of that site, mldc.imageNet.com. It is publicly available. You can try it out. And it looks very much the same. It still has the register and sign in. And you might ask, well, why didn't you create just a single button like you have on the Extranet User Manager website I was just showing you that's a register/sign in? What we wanted to do was what March of Dimes had created on their site was actually a landing page for people that want to register or are curious about registering that really explains what's going to happen when they do that registration. So this is kind of a pre-registration step. They have a full video that explains the purpose of the site and what's going to happen through there and what the benefits are from that. So that registration link really just comes to this page here to say, hey, here's some background material you may be curious about before you make that decision of whether you want to sign up to the site or not. When you click the Get Started, or you come to the sign in, or if you're even back on the main homepage and you sign in here, it's all taking you to the same place, which is that new user-centric login experience that we've been talking about. So I'm just going to pause and take a quick drink of water. All right. So same functionality, same code base that I was just showing on the Extranet User Manager site, obviously a very different look. We are still on our, we're no longer on the SharePoint site. And I should have given you some background. The site that we were on, the Afterstroke site, is actually built on SharePoint 2013. So it's hosted on premises at March of Dimes Canada, and then we're installed onto the same servers there. So they're not using the cloud just yet there. We've talked about, we can deploy the site as an Azure app service. We can certainly deploy Extranet User Manager as an app service. That's sort of a future direction for the project. So I've come into the login site here, but we've completely rebranded the Extranet User Manager experience around Afterstroke. And I have the same choices I had before. We've taken a few off. We just have Google and Facebook from the federation. We may add Microsoft in there from that point of view as well. And let's change it up. We did the Google path before. Let's actually go through the email path as part of this one here. So I click on email. And remember, the system still doesn't know whether I've already got an account or I'm going to be registering. So let's use one of my test accounts here that I haven't actually set up in the system just yet. And it says, hey, I don't know who you are. We need to go through the registration process. Now, as I mentioned, we've just been building this. Some feedback that I need to give to our developers is we need to be a little clearer as I do that transition that, hey, you're a new user. I don't recognize you. We actually need to go through that registration process. So we're going to tweak that a little bit and provide a little more feedback as part of that. But let's assume for the moment that I'm a caregiver. So I may be one of these three audiences here. I'm going to choose the caregiver option. That's my primary role. I can still select a secondary role that maybe I am a stroke survivor or a healthcare provider in addition to that primary role. I'm going to leave those off for right now and go ahead next. Now, if I was social, it would have pulled my name in like we saw before. Right now, the only information I've given it is my email address. So I'm going to fill in my first name, last name, and because we're using email, I actually need to use a password. 1Password will create a suggested password for me. I'm just going to use my own demo password in here. Need to re-enter that. My country, my postal code, and then we get into some of the demographic information that we want to collect as part of this. Are you urban or rural? What's your age group? I said that I was a caregiver. The related stroke incident was when, maybe 0 to 3 months ago, and it was a first stroke. Hit next. Oh, I thought I checked that one. Let me do that again. Now we've got a number of areas of interest that we can then target content to this person in based on what they're looking for. Maybe they're looking for aphasia services, social interaction services. They're curious about the e-newsletter, so they can profile themselves through there. They can even suggest a topic and hit next from there. So a quick summary page to say, hey, here's all the information that you've given us. And we've got a step-by-step showing you through that process. You have a sense of how long that process is and what that looks like. If everything looks good, go ahead and sign me up. I can click on the edit button if I want to go back and fix one of those. Let's go ahead and say, yeah, looks good, sign me up. Now what's going to happen here, remember I put in my own email address. The site at this point doesn't know whether I actually own that email address or not. So what it needs to do is to do an email validation step. We've sent an email across and we need the user to enter the code from that email. We don't want to abandon the session that they're in. They're already going through that login process. So what they need to do is come over to their email. Let me just open this up for us here. And it's sent through a 6-digit code here saying, hey, here's your verification code. This proves that you actually own that email address that you just did the registration with. So I go ahead and just paste that in here, validate my code. Everything looks good. I'm now signed in, and away I go from there. I can see my profile. I can see my username is that pcarson3 account that I created from there. And we can now start to target content to me appropriate to how I profiled myself through there, including from an e-newsletter point of view and from a outreach and follow-up point of view. Now there's a second email that was sent to me as well. Let me just open that one up here. This is the welcome email. So this is important. When I'm curious about coming back to the site, maybe I don't remember the URL or what's up in there, I can just click on the get started. That'll take me right back into the site from there. Now, if I had abandoned that process and maybe I didn't complete the email validation, when I click this get started, because I'm clicking from an email, we actually automate that as well. And we'll recognize that as an email validation and allow you to continue through from there without having to redo that process. So again, every touch point, we want to think about, what are the possible scenarios? Where may somebody abandon and then restart later? And how do we make that as seamless and simple for them as possible? So let's actually use our Extranet User Manager site. I want to take you through a couple of other scenarios as part of that as well. just accept that. Actually, I want to check because I did Gmail for that one there. I want to use an email scenario. Sorry, bear with me one moment here. We're going to spend a little time looking at this a little later. I just want to see what test accounts I have. So pcarson 6 was the last one that I used. So let's say I want to sign in with that pcarson 6, which I did as a part of a dry run and created as an email account. Common scenario is I've created an email and password on your site. It's been a number of months maybe since I've been there before, and I don't remember how to get back into that site. So let's make it very easy for them to go through that experience. So when I come to the login, which for some reason is taking a minute here, there we go. I click on the email. I say, hey, I've got some trouble signing in here. I know I registered on your site with this pcarson 6 account, but I can't remember my credentials. Maybe I tried to get in and it just wasn't working. So I want to be able to do a reset on that. So what this is doing is sending an email out to me to say, hey, there's going to be a link in there. You can use that link to now reset your password, because we want to make it very self-service and easy for people to come in and do that process. It's a very common scenario. People just don't remember how they previously authenticated, and they want to come in through that. So we can see here is our password reset email. Now I do need to, let me see about this. I actually want to direct that to my in private window, just because I've got multiple browsers going here. Bear with me a sec. And it's saying, hey, you've used that link. It came to your email address, so I know it's you. And here's your ability to set a new password. But I can even go further than that. I can say, you know what? For this account, I actually want to flip it over to Google. I'm tired of remembering the password. I just want to use Google to sign in, or Facebook or Microsoft. So you can actually switch your provider method as part of that forgotten password reset through there. But let's say I'm going to stick with an email and password. I just go ahead and enter in whatever new password I want to use. So I can't retrieve my old password, but I can choose a new one. I go ahead and set it. And just like the registration process, we've made this a very seamless experience that in addition to resetting my password, chances are the reason I wanted to reset it was I wanted to sign into your site. So let's just sign right into the site. Let's go right through that whole process. Don't force me to then go through another login, enter my email address again, enter my password that I just entered again. Make that a very seamless experience for them. So again, you can see that focus on user experience throughout that whole process. So let's come back to our PowerPoint deck here now. So we've talked about the Extranet User Manager website itself, the work that we've been doing on March of Dimes Canada, which is still from a development point of view. Let's take a quick switch here. So this is another case study. We've talked about this one in past webinars, the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies. So there are the umbrella organization across about 50 plus member organizations, all the various different children's aid societies across the province of Ontario. I actually need to update these numbers. 8,000 members, they actually have more than 17,000 registered users on their site now. So that's really grown. I mean, it's both staff and volunteers that are coming into that site. They receive provincial funding to provide training resources, and they use SharePoint Online and Desire to Learn in order to deliver that. They had a previous portal. We replaced that a couple of years ago with this scenario here. So it's a fully cloud-hosted solution, both from an Extranet User Manager point of view, as well as from a SharePoint perspective. We're using Office 365, and Desire to Learn is a SaaS solution that's managed by D2L through that. They have a keen need for auto approval and registration. They went through a process there at one point in time where they were onboarding 500 net new users per day at their peak. They went from 1,000 or two to north of 8,000 users in the order of a week or two. It was a very short time frame. So that ability to scale that up and to manage that level of registrations was key to them. We want to provide single sign-on to Office 365 and D2L, obviously responsive from a mobile point of view, and they're leveraging the Office 365 for nonprofits licensing to provide that licensing as part of that. So let's actually go to their live site. If I come across to my incognito window here, and I do ocas.sharepoint.com, Now, anytime you go to a site.sharepoint.com, you know that you're going to Office 365. That's a common URL that all SharePoint Onlines share. You can't change it. Everyone's got to live with that. And OACAS.sharepoint.com is theirs. Normally, when you do that and you hit enter, what you expect to see is a Microsoft login come up as part of that. Now, it flashed by on the URL. You may have missed it. It was pretty quick there. What happened is we've done home realm discovery acceleration to say, well, we don't actually want the Microsoft login. We want the customized OACAS login, which is actually Extranet User Manager, coming up in front of that in Office 365. So again, I've got to do an email and password sign in. This is still using the older version of UM, so not the user-centric one that we've recently launched out. Now, we're in discussions with them. I'd love to see them running the new version now that it's available and simplify that login experience. The area I want to focus on, though, is around the registration. So their registration is already somewhat sophisticated and needs to go a fair bit further than that in terms of supporting their business needs. I mean, they have a number of different systems that they're supporting. We need to create accounts not just in Office 365, but in Desire to Learn, and more recently in Training Orchestra. So all of the profile information needs to get distributed across to all those organizations. We also have a need for auto approval. So if we come into the organization list, and let's say I work for the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, for example, if I put in an email address here that matches the domain for the organization that I've selected, I know that that person works for that organization because they're going to need access to that email to complete their registration to get access to the site. So if it's a CAST, Children's Aid Society of Toronto email, I know they already work for it. We can do an auto approval, put them in the appropriate group, and take them right through there. And we didn't need anybody at OACAS to make a decision as to whether to approve that account or not, which significantly decreases the workload on the OACAS staff that are managing this portal. They have limited budget, limited resources to do that. We want to automate that as much as possible. They've come back to us recently to say, well, we want to get more sophisticated than that. We want to keep allow lists of users for specific purposes that will be auto-approved into specific groups and things like that. How do we get more sophisticated from that point of view? Well, we can always continue to extend the customizations that we've done from a registration point of view, or we can start to leverage some more sophisticated tools around that. And really, Microsoft Flow is where we see that going from that point of view. So I didn't show you when we were going through the website. We've actually done a POC around some of this and built that out in Flow. So let me come back to my signed in browser session here, and I'm going to go to flow.microsoft.com. For those of you that are not familiar with Flow, Flow is an awesome workflow and business process automation tool, not just for the Microsoft ecosystem, for a much broader ecosystem. I give talks. In fact, I'm giving one at Toronto SharePoint Users Group tomorrow night on creating custom connectors for Flow. And you can see past webinars I've done and recordings on that topic that talk about how do you connect Flow into your custom applications, into SaaS applications that you use as part of that. And there's a whole process for creating those custom connectors, which is not that onerous. But let's come into my flows. I've got a number of different flows that we're running here, including team flows that I'm sharing with other team members. And it's this one here, the website registration, that I want to focus on first. So let's go ahead and edit that flow. So flows are very easy. I mean, once you've got the connectors there and configured, actually creating the flows from there becomes a fairly simple task. I can literally come here and say, I want to insert a new step into this flow. Say I want to do an action, and you'll see that there's literally hundreds of different connectors available, not just from Microsoft, but from third parties as well. You know, I can say, hey, when somebody tweets something, I want to put that into my Salesforce database. You can have that out of the box. You know, they're non-Microsoft technologies, but the connectors are there to allow you to do that. So it's pretty sophisticated from that point of view. Now we've created a custom connector for Extranet User Manager that allows us to do a lot of different things. This particular one says put a user into a particular role. Now this is a very simple flow from an EUM point of view, but basically what we're doing is we're saying, hey, when an item is created in the user table, so somebody is registered on the site, then start the flow running from there. And what we want to do is add them into a particular role. So imagine in the OACAS scenario, we can start to build very large decision matrices that say, hey, based on their registration information, start to make decisions and decide what roles we want to put them into, whether we want to auto approve them or not, what emails we need to send out. All that can get managed as part of this through here. At the end of the day here, I'm just doing a simple send of an email. We could have approval workflows as part of this, And the beauty of Flow is those approval workflows can be quite sophisticated and again, quite user-friendly. We've got things like actionable messages where right in Outlook, I can approve or reject that new user without even having to come into our Extranet User Manager product. Just hit approve right in Outlook, boom, it's done, and away it goes from there. So let's come back to this flow and actually just look at some of the history on it. So, half an hour ago when I was doing my demos, some of those flows were proceeding through there. So we can see this particular one here ran successfully. It actually only took about 1 second to go through the whole flow from there. So if I open this up, I can actually see all the details. Oh, sorry, that was one of our clients from MC Ohio. Rob, thank you for going through that registration. So I can see all his details that were in there. I can see that he was added to a particular role through our custom connector that we've created for Extranet User Manager. And then an email was sent to me saying, hey, somebody just registered on the site through there with a link to see them. So actually, if I come to my Outlook, let me just find that one. You know what, I'll be kind to Rob. I'll actually use my Gmail scenario, which is a different email that I've got here. So this is the email that I got from Flow. Very basic layout on it. I can get a lot more sophisticated in terms of how I structure that out. And I can click on this link here to say, hey, I want to edit the details for that user that just registered. So I can see all the details of that Gmail registration that I did as part of my example through here. And down here, I can see that that user has actually been put into the demo group as part of that. So each new user that registered on our site actually gets added right into that demo account automatically as part of that. So it becomes very easy to build sophisticated processes around that. We've got this concept of groups in Extranet User Manager. We can then apply permissions to that to say, hey, if you belong to this group, these are the things that you can do in the Extranet portal, in the other applications like Desire to Learn, what have you from there. Some of the private registration that we're not going to get into too much today, we start to see here where we can say, well, that group is actually available for registration. Maybe it's publicly available, maybe it's not. Maybe I need to use this private registration link here, which I can copy to email to people to say, hey, you can come straight into this group through here. And we've got things like membership requests that track those approvals and such through there. This is all done with the core product, but a lot of this functionality can be extended and built on as part of those flow workflows that I was showing you through there. So it gives you a quick sense of where we're going from a flow integration point of view, what that looks like. So let's come back to here. I mean, this is sort of an overview of technology underneath. We've got our Extranet User Manager product, the Office 365 tenant, the Desire to Learn portal. There's actually a third I should add in here, which is the Training Orchestra, which is another product they're using, and this is all actually now integrated in with Salesforce as well from a CRM and tracking point of view. So it's grown since we initially implemented it. Need to update the slide to reflect its current solution architecture. And this is just a quick visual of what's happening here, of coming into that OACAS site and saying, hey, let's have a trigger happen in Flow. We can do some decisions around how that registration is going to be processed and ultimately make some updates back into Extranet User Manager itself as part of that. Here's the full set of capabilities in that connector. There's a lot of different things that we can do. We can add and edit users, put them into roles. We can trigger forgotten passwords, do email validations. Basically all the functionality of our Extranet User Manager product we expose as an API, which you can code directly against. But the easier way to do that is use things like the Power Connector, not just for Flow, but even Power Apps as well, can write against that. One of our clients, United Church of Canada, is actually using that as part of their onboarding process. So they've got Power Apps that allow you to onboard, and part of what it does is calls out to Extranet User Manager to create those accounts, amongst other things, through that connector and through those APIs. So you can start to build fairly sophisticated applications and business processes as part of that. This is the quick flow that I showed you through there from there. So that's really the main things that I wanted to walk you through there. Just to quickly summarize, we started with the new user-centric login on the Extranet User Manager website, took you through how we've implemented that into March of Dimes, the branding, the custom registration that we've built as part of that, and then some of the more sophisticated registration approval processes that we're doing in Flow, how that applies to clients like OACAS, and goes from there. terms of upcoming events, I mentioned I'm going to be speaking on custom connectors for the Power Platform. So that's Flow and Power Apps. Tomorrow, if you're in the Toronto area, come on down to the Toronto SharePoint Users Group for that. We've got a link on our event site for that. Logan, runs our sales for Extranet User Manager, he and I are going to actually be down in Vegas next week. Big conference, SharePoint conference, North America. Expecting lots of announcements and interesting news from Microsoft. They're going to be heavily represented there. If you're attending the show yourself, by all means, come by, see our booth, have a chat. I'd love to talk to you from that point of view. If you're in the municipal space, we're actually going to be exhibiting at MISA Ontario and Niagara at the beginning of June as well. So again, if you're at that particular conference, love to see you. Come by and say hi to us. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you, everybody. Not sure if we've had questions as we're going through. Haven't had a chance to watch myself. Andrew, Logan, if you want to raise any right now that maybe haven't been answered as we've been going through, or we can take those as takeaways from there. As I mentioned, didn't think we were going to take the full hour. Logan, do we have some questions there? Awesome. Well, thanks, everybody. I'll give you 15 minutes back to your lunch hour. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and thanks again for joining us for our webinar.